Whaling in the Netherlands. Whaling in the Netherlands was a centuries-long tradition. The history of Dutch whaling begins with 17th-century exploration of Arctic fishing grounds, and the profitability of whaling in the 18th century drove further growth. Increased competition and political upheavals in Europe affected the stability of this maritime industry in the 19th century, and a combination of these factors cut short any further growth of Dutch whaling in the Antarctic. Modern, post-war whaling in the southern oceans was developed intensely, but continued growth of Dutch whaling was abbreviated as a result of multinational treaties which similarly impacted other national whaling enterprises. The current Dutch government supports a moratorium on all whaling worldwide. History. The beginnings of Dutch whaling are indirectly attributed to Willem Barents, anglicized as William Barents or Barents 1550–1597, who was a Dutch navigator and explorer, a leader of early expeditions to the far north. On his last voyage, Barents accompanied Jacob van Heemskerk as pilot, and Gerrit de Veer, the historian of the voyage, was on board as first mate. This expedition's discovery of the Arctic archipelago of Spitsbergen, now known as Svalbard, was to become the foundation for lucrative Dutch claims to the whaling grounds in and around the islands. In the fierce competition for the best whaling grounds, the Dutch construed that other nations had less right to hunt whales in waters which had been discovered by Dutch explorers. The development of Dutch whaling and sealing saw changes in the composition of crews, in shipbuilding technology, in governmental involvement, and in the profitability of the industries. 17th century. The numbers of whaling ships outfitted in the Netherlands grew rapidly, more than doubling in a decade to 70 ships in 1654, and more than doubling again to 148 ships in 1670. The ships involved in whaling helped to make the Dutch Republic one of the richest nations of the 17th century, but this resource was ruthlessly exploited, and by the mid-17th century the catches decreased as the favored whales became rare. Whaling in the waters around Spitsbergen shifted after 1670 because of a modification of the whale's migratory patterns. Some have attributed this change to a global warming trend which permitted the whales to return to their normal summer grounds off the northeast coast of Greenland, but it could have been simply that whales who had survived aggressive whale hunting in earlier seasons were simply avoiding the whalers. In 1684, 246 Dutch whalers captured 1185 whales in the waters off Spitsbergen. Typically, whaling expeditions hunted the bowhead whale, which is a slow-moving, unhurried creature which yields plenty of oil. Their high percentage of body fat also meant that they floated when dead and therefore were easy to tow back to the land. 18th century. During the 17th and 18th century, the people from the North Frisian Islands enjoyed a reputation of being very skilled mariners, and most Dutch whaling ships bound for Greenland and Svalbard would have a crew of North Frisian Islanders. Especially Four Island has been recorded as a stronghold of whaling personnel. At the height of Dutch whaling in the year 1762, 1186 seamen from Four were serving on Dutch whaling vessels alone, and 25% of all shipmasters on Dutch whaling vessels were people from Four. Dutch supremacy in whaling over other European competitors like France, Germany, and Britain diminished in the second half of the 18th century. 19th century. Amongst the political and economic consequences of the Treaty of Amiens was that control of the Cape of Good Hope was wrested from the British and restored to the Netherlands. This reanimated the prospects for profitable Dutch whaling in the Antipodes. In the wake of the British and the Americans, the Dutch made attempts to organize whaling in the Southern Ocean, including the Afrikaans Visserij Sociëteit, the African Fishery Society, which was founded in Amsterdam in 1802. A significant system of subsidies issued by the king and his ministers supported Dutch entrepreneurs, which minimized a competitive disadvantage in a period of international whaling, with similar financial incentives being funded by many national governments. In this context, a lack of quality in the art of shipbuilding and in the training of seamen has been regarded as very important factors in explaining the ultimate failure of the Dutch whaling industry in the late 19th century. Dutch culture. Modern whaling. During the 2 decades after the end of World War II, the Netherlands aggressively pursued whaling in the Antarctic. In 1964, the long history of Dutch whaling came to a conclusive end when the country's last factory ship, poetically named Willem Barents, was sold to Japanese whaling interests. The current Dutch government opposes the practice of whaling, and the Netherlands is committed to seeing new and improved binding agreements made within the International Whaling Commission. Footnotes: